Hello and welcome to Walker Tea Review. I'm Jason Walker, here to explore yet another tea. You never run out of new teas to try. This is a pu'er, and it's been broken off of a cake, and so I've got some large chunks here that we're going to look at a little bit in just a few seconds, actually. But I need to set those out of the way for the moment while I get some of the looser pieces here that will steep a little more quickly, a little more evenly. So I'm going to drop these into my guy one. Now you want to have hands that are clean, of course, but you also want to have hands that are free of any kind of fragrance, whether that's from soaps or lotions or anything like that. So I'm covering the bottom, say, inch to inch and a half of my 3-ounce guy one here. I don't want to be able to see any of the surface there, so I need just a pinch more. That should do it. Okay, we'll leave those out because we talk about, well, no, I take that back. I want to smell them, and I want the smell to be a little bit more concentrated. So I'm going to put them back in right now before I forget that the aromas kind of build up in there. So set that down. Water's been brought to an early boil. Been cooling just a little, for a few minutes while I've been talking here. Add enough water so a little bit's going to rest above the rim of my lid, just like so. Let me get this kettle out of the way, and then I'll be able to talk about this tea. This is from ChinaChaDao. It's the website, ChinaChaDao.com. This is their 2012 Douji, which is the name of the producer, the creator of this pu'er. The DoujiHongDaDou is the name of this. You can get a 357 gram cake, which is a pressed disc of the full amount of this cake, for $39.99 US dollars, $40 basically. Douji tries to do more of some of the traditional processing. They try to get go to old arbors. They aim towards the higher end, maybe some of the collector value type pu'er. What information I can tell about this tea? The leaves were from the Munghai and Mengku areas in Yunnan province. Production time or production date is April 10th, 2012, and that's batch number 1201. So that information is provided on the product page at ChinaChaDao. Now, this is also described as a spring tea. Now, that does not necessarily mean that those leaves were harvested in 2012 and then pressed into a cake in 2012. Sometimes leaves are harvested from years prior, maybe even more than 1 year, combined and pressed together. And so the production date, that batch and production date, reflects when this tea was pressed into a cake, not necessarily when the leaves were harvested. So, having said that, I'm going to get now into this particular pu'er to talk about the dry leaf, the wet leaf, and the liquor. Starting off here with the dry. I'm going to breathe into this, breathe a little bit of moist, warm breath in here. Smells are light, but they are comparable to a lot of your sheng pu'er type, which this is a sheng pu'er. It's designed. It's going to be one of those one of those that could be put away and aged, whether it becomes a valuable tea. The intention here is that this is something they've created a tea here that should be put away and aged well. That was the design or the intention usually. Now you're getting some of the light straw, greener smells. There's a bit of a green tea, so there's a bit more of a field meadow type flowers. Maybe they've been cut into hay. They've dried a little bit, so there's kind of a sweetness there. But again, it's more of a strawy or a hay type of sweetness at this point. Because that's what hay is. You take the fresh grasses, you kind of crush them slightly, break them a little bit so the juices escape a little bit, and dry that. So, having said that, I should be looking now at the dry leaf a little more carefully. Again, this was broken off of a cake, a disc, and so these leaves are still fairly well compressed together. You can see some silvery, golden looking color here. That's maybe 5 to 10%. You've got a gray-green color running throughout as well. You've got leaves that look to be 2 inches or so in length, 1 inch to 2 inch. Flipping it over, you can kind of see a little bit more. They've been pressed fairly densely. I mean, you could gently wiggle portions of this apart, but they're all interwoven with each other. Look to be larger leaves. These were not the smallest, most delicate leaves, but that's part of the recipe or the formula that's used when these leaves are sorted and collected and pressed together. Now I'm going to go now and get into the wet leaf and the liquor. So I'm going to angle my lid over to the side. Index finger holds the lid, middle and thumb, maybe the ring back here holds the bowl. Nice smooth pour, that's good. Shaking out this last few drops there. Okay. Nice color there, but I'll talk more about the liquor in just a moment. Get into this wet leaf here. This has more of the green tea type of characteristics. I did get some of that sweet straw, sweet hay type smells. That was the initial. With the heat of the tea, with the steam of the tea that lifted up. So you get different aromas whether you sniff the lid, inside the lid, or down into the wet leaves themselves. So I recommend doing both. There are advantages to doing both. When I smell into the leaves themselves, they have more of a green tea that has been roasted, heated in some sense, fired in some sense, so they have a kind of a beany type of note. That's what I picked up. So first off was the straw, the hay type smells, and then the beany notes. Lima bean, cooked lima bean type smells. So I should take out a few of these leaves. I'm going to get these little crumbs away because they don't necessarily count. You see leaf portions. This leaf is, maybe 80% plus intact. Fairly thin, not a leathery old tough leaf necessarily. Here's another. Let's scrape off a little bits and pieces that stuck to that. Another fairly thin leaf, large, but it's still a portion, not a full leaf. What else do we have? What else do I have here? Another leaf. These have, because they were broken, I should say, separated well, not a big clump. It's not going to actually unfold, but I'll put it there. These leaves did loosen up quite a bit because they were separated from the. If you broke off a chunk of the cake and put it into a gaiwan, you may not have leaves that were quite this loose. It may take several steepings. A little bud or a portion of a bud, the upper portion of a bud there. Let's see, a little stem piece like this here and there, occasionally. Not that often in this particular steep. Okay, that's pretty good. What you see are green leaves, some oxidation that's taken place along the edges of some of these leaves so that they've got a little bit of a rust color. Some leaves have more of that oxidation than others. Okay, so I want to set that to the side now and get into the liquor. I'm going to give this a swirl. Hold that up to the light. You can see that's got a rich, pretty deep, pale, I should say golden brown type of color there. Okay, so some teas that have aged more, some pours that have aged more than this, I see this type of color. So that's interesting. Let me smell the pitcher here. I'm getting some aromas off the cup, but this big pitcher really lets you stick your nose down in there. The strawy, hay type elements are there. Let me give it a sip here. Okay, Sheng pu'ers, generally, as they are younger, they can have some astringency. This one is no exception. It has astringency. What I don't get is a harsh bitterness with it. I mean, there's an astringency there, pops up, drops off fairly quickly. It's got some texture to it. It feels a little bit thicker already. It's got some, it's not minerally, watery, that just drops off too quickly. Still get the those characteristic hay, sweet hay straw type of notes there in the character, the taste there. In the back, it does get a bit. It's astringent, but it's also yields to a bit of a kind of sweetness there, more than a lemon. You know how a lemon could be acidic, astringent almost, yet, or a grapefruit, say. A grapefruit can have some astringence, some sourness there, and yet that tapers off, and you get a bit of the citrus sweetness there. In a similar way, the astringency has backed off of this in the back and the aftertaste, and allowed a kind of citrus-like, not taste-wise, but that depth, that range, that intensity of sweetness there that you might find with a grapefruit. That kind of sweetness is resting in the back of my mouth right now. Those components, all those components together, indicate that as this tea ages, if aged in the right conditions, the astringency would continue to mellow out. It would, the other components, the sweetness, the flavor components would alternate or build or even expand, and so you get potentially a very nicely aged pu'er. So when I looked at this tea, this one has potential. You can't really, I don't want to score it based on potential, but this was a well-constructed tea that is can likely age well. So I would give this one, I'd give this a 90. So come back to Walker Tea Review to find those teas. If you're looking for a tea that's going to age well, that's going to drink now, whichever of those, whatever end you're looking for, come back to Walker Tea Review to explore those together.